back. WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We're keeping calm. We're staying local. And Luke Jones joins us now to do something we don't do a whole lot around here anymore. Luke, we used to be a sports radio station, WNST. It says we never stopped talking Baltimore sports until, there were no sports to talk about. I guess on a weekly basis, if you take a week, things happen during the course of the week, whether it's the Orange Idiot talking to all of the commissioners of sports, which happened over the weekend, and saying we're going to have football, and the NFL appears as though business is normal, and they're really going to draft football players, and they're having a liars luncheon this week. It's so serious that Kevin Bryne decided to, hit the exit button. It's incredible, right?
Yeah, we're all still thinking about sports. I think as much as we can, you try to have some diversions, and certainly free agency offered that for a time, but that slowed down, and now we're counting down to the draft. We're, 3 weeks out from the draft, or I guess a little less than that at this point. But I think there's plenty of reasons to be pessimistic. I think we're all encountering that in our individual lives. You wake up certain days and you're just like, oh, we're doing this again. But I think at the same time, it's fine to have optimism. And I think, especially when we talk about the NFL season, it's one thing to talk about the NBA, NHL, MLB, the many sporting events that have been canceled already.
Yeah, we sort of know they're done. We're in the middle of it. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel normal when it's 72 degrees and there's nothing, right? Literally.
Right. But at the same time, we are still 5 months away from the start of the NFL season, or at least the scheduled start. So is it important to be realistic and understand the possibilities? Sure. At the same time, do I think it's all that constructive to just say, well, there's no way they're playing football either? Well, I think that's a little more debatable. I think there are certain things that we can still hold on to and look to and say, well, a lot can happen in 5 months. I mean, think about what's happened over the last month. That's not to say that it's the virus is going to go away in 2 weeks.
You mean these 5 weeks haven't been 5 months, really?
Right. But at the same time, it is a reminder that a lot can happen in 5 months. So, from that standpoint, I think the NFL, I think some of the criticism as far as some of the comments they've made over the last week has been unfair. I think behind the scenes, they clearly know that there's a real potential for their season to be canceled, be adjusted, be delayed, be shortened, be modified, whatever it might be. I think there's an acknowledgement of that. But at the same
virus
time,
will make the schedule, right?
Right. I mean, I think we're all understanding that at this point, whether we like it or not. I mean, that's just reality. But again, I think optimism is fine, and I don't think it's completely unrealistic or anything like that. I think it's an acknowledgement of a lot needs to change over the next 5 months, and I think we're all hoping that that's going to happen over the next 5 months. We're all hoping that it's not going to be 5 months to get certain portions of our life back to some kind of normal, new normal, modified normal, whatever doesn't involve us being in our homes all the time.
Well, they don't play the NFL down there in Arkansas and Alabama. They don't play the NFL down there, so they don't have to have any lockouts. So I mean, that's one of my issues. Is you want this to be 60 days? Be 60 days. Be smart. If you want to pee in part of the pool and think that it's not going to come to this side of the pool, well, then we're going to have an issue. That's a political issue, but that's a football issue as much as it's an American issue, as much as it's when do our kids go back to school? All of that stuff. That's all about, whenever it's clean, whenever it's safe, and it's incumbent upon all of us to make it safe. And I am worried about the NFL, and I think the NFL's worried about the NFL, and I know the schedule's going to get pushed out now, and I'm not making any plans for September 9th to be in Houston or anything. I'll tell you that much, right?
Yeah, I mean, the schedule they've already said is probably going to come out around the second week of May. And in past years, it's come out right before the draft, so we're getting a change there. And that's not to say they won't delay it a little bit more. I mean, again, see what happens in the coming weeks, and they adjust. And if that means they're playing empty stadium games, if that means they're playing a 12-game schedule, if that means no football, which certainly no one wants at this point, but I think at least acknowledging the possibility, which I don't know what that does for anyone in their everyday life. I mean, we all have much more important things we're worrying about on a daily basis, but I think it's okay to have cautious optimism and to keep in mind a lot can happen between now and then, and a lot's going to happen between now and then for there to be any sports in 2020. I think we all acknowledge that at this point. But bringing it back full circle, you mentioned Kevin Bryne. I mean, certainly pretty unceremonial departure for him when you consider how important, how integral his role was in the transition from Cleveland to Baltimore, the transition in making what used to be a Baltimore Colts town so many years ago and a town that was dormant when it came to NFL football anyway. His role in helping establish the Ravens and the Ravens then becoming what they have become over the last 2 decades, a pretty special thing. Unfortunate for it to be in these circumstances. But at the same time, Kevin Bryne's been at it a long time, and I wish him well in retirement. And
I feel like I need to write a book on Kevin Bryne is what I feel like I need to do. Kevin Bryne, by the way, and I've told some of his staffers this, I think, and I'm going to look into this because I'm serious about it, and I've brought it up with Kevin once or twice, and I've brought it up with Kevin in the last 5 or 6 years, every time he and I wind up in a stadium we've never been in, right? So Wembley Stadium, right? The new Minnesota Stadium, the new Atlanta Stadium. When we walked into the LA Memorial Coliseum, I said to him, "You've seen an NFL game here, haven't you?" He said, "Yeah, the Browns played here, played the Raiders a million years." I'm like, "I know you have, right?"
Yeah.
But I hadn't seen a game there, so I got to add it. And I said to him, "This is one where I'm catching your ass, So I don't know. I think Kevin has seen more NFL games in more places than me for sure. I think I've seen a lot. And I think like some Gil Brandt types would be involved in this, Luke. But I really do believe because of Kevin's age, because he's old enough to have been in really old places. He was the St. Louis Cardinals PR director. People don't realize that, right? So, in the old Busch Stadium and whatnot. Now, there's a place I never saw a football game, right? So if you start to add stadia in the 70s and early 80s that went away, and he's been in every modern stadium, then you take like the Art Modell barnstorming things that Art used to do, like the Browns probably played a game in Legion Field in Birmingham at some point or like that, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. The NFL sanctioned preseason games. At one point, I think Kevin went to either Japan or England with Art, with the Browns, doing some crazy 1980s preseason game or whatever. So I know I haven't been to Rio with an NFL game yet, or Mexico City or wherever, and I've been to Wembley. I think Kevin may have seen NFL games, NFL-sanctioned games, in more stadia or stadiums, depending on your word, than any other human being. I mean that. I mean like John Madden. I'm going like through people that would span the eras. I think Kevin may be the world's record holder in that department.
Yeah, it's very well possible. You think about some of the longest tenured head coaches, a Tom Landry, Don Shula.
But Tom Landry died before 30 stadiums got built.
Sure.
Now, that's what I'm saying about stadiums, you know what I mean? But Tom Landry probably coached a game in Fenway Park in the AFL. Or I don't know. I'm making that up. But in that era of AFL and NFL and switching around and stuff, you were around during that era, but there weren't 32 teams either, right? So I'm sure Kevin saw a game in Shea Stadium, I think. I'm pretty sure he did. Saw a football game there. I could be wrong.
Right, and that's just the reality when you've worked in the NFL for parts of, 5 decades, parts of 6 decades maybe?
Dude, I would sit here and add them up. It's got to be into the 70s or into the 80s. Luke, if I count how many NFL stadia I've seen a game in, you and I saw a game in Canton, Ohio, right? So you could start to add places up. I saw the Liberty Bowl, right? I go back to Riverfront Stadium and the Astrodome and all the old stadiums. So Kevin and I overlap, but it's the places like that are really, really weird that I haven't been around. Like, I never saw an NFL game in the Kingdome.
Okay.
right? So
Right.
like I just didn't. So he's got one I didn't get. I never saw anything at Kezar Stadium, but I did see Candlestick Park, right? L.A., well, they never had a team. I never saw an NFL game at the Anaheim Stadium where the Rams played. I'm sure Kevin did, right? At some point he saw Jerome Bettis there or something, right? So I'm just going through all these places. I mean, Sun Devil Stadium, there's 2 stadiums in Arizona. Dallas, there's been 2 stadiums in Dallas. Houston, there's been 2. I don't know that the Oilers never played at Rice Stadium, but somebody saw a Super Bowl there, right? John Stedman did. Jerry Eisenberg would be a guy that is probably seen because he goes back to the AFL and probably craziness. Jerry Eisenberg would be a guy that I would say, and Jerry Green as well. Those would be guys who saw games, probably saw the Detroit Lions play wherever the hell they played in 1964, right? Tiger Stadium, right? So, yeah, I mean, adding stadium, but Kevin's there, dude. Kevin's in the Hall of Fame for that, no doubt about it.
Sure. I mean, you just think about how long he was a Cleveland Brown, and then how long he became a Baltimore Raven and stayed with the Ravens this long. I mean, when you and you can certainly appreciate this. I mean, the transition from Cleveland to Baltimore. I mean, there's still people left from who were in Cleveland, but it's not that many.
Bob Eller. Let's see who else. I'm just going through the list.
But it's a short list at this point. But
I feel like Francine's still around. I love Francine.
Yeah, but it's been a quarter century now. I mean, that's what we're talking. I mean, the Ravens are, God willing, and this thing, does allow football in 2020 at some point. This will be the Ravens' 25th season. So
I put a picture of Kevin up holding the AFC Championship trophy on the field on the little makeshift dais that they had where they handed Art the AFC trophy, the Lamar Hunt trophy.
Lamar Hunt, yeah.
The big heavy one, not the goofy little basketball thing they do now.
Yeah.
That thing was substantial, dude. That thing weighed 25 pounds when I carried. And I took a picture of Kevin and David Modell holding it, and Art was behind them. And they invited me up onto the stage. Kevin's like, you got to come up here and hold this thing. So I went up and I held it with David. And maybe Kevin took that picture of me. I kind of have it hanging on the wall. And I found that picture the other day because I tried to think, how many pictures do I have with Kevin Bryne? And I'm thinking, we used to take a lot of pictures back in the 90s. When he first came here, he brought Ted Marchibroda out to the barn. I'm sure he's in one of those pictures. I did not go fingering through all my physical pictures. I went through the digitized version of things. And I found that picture, and I thought to myself, oh, my God, David and Art are dead. And Kevin's the only person alive in that picture. And I thought to myself, wow, I don't think of David as dead, right? I don't think I don't think of it like that as we age, as we're in the middle of a pandemic and I have gray beard and I'm too lazy to shave. It really does mark time, right? I mean, it does mark time that it's been 20 years since I took that picture, and it feels like 20 minutes ago. It really does.
It really does. And, I mean, I can think to my first experience with Kevin Bryne, which, is much more recent. It was 2009, I believe it was, first training camp that I covered at WNST, first professional sports media experience that I had covering training camp at McDaniel in Westminster, and I believe it was an afternoon practice. Remember, that was when there were still true two-a-days in training camp. You'd have the full squad, legitimate practice in the morning, and then you'd have a special teams workout in the afternoon. But in Westminster at that point in time, when they do the special teams workouts at 2 o'clock, there'd usually be 3 or 4 reporters there. It was light. Ray Lewis and those types of veterans would not be on the field. But I can recall Kevin Bryne approaching me and a couple other reporters. It's nothing fancy. It was very informal, but he asked the question at the time, and he was asking about the marching Ravens. If you know this very well, Nestor, their original fight song was not the same tune as the Baltimore Colts fight song. It was a different song, and there were mixed results. Some people liked it, some people didn't like it. But that was the year 2009 when that summer they were considering bringing back the Colts fight song, just tweaking the lyrics. And he asked a couple of the other reporters, I can't remember who it was, but he asked me about it, asked if I was from Baltimore originally, because at this point, Kevin Bryne, I think I'd said hello to him, and that's it. I was a newbie. But I told him from my personal experience as a Baltimorean, knowing what the Colts meant to my grandparents, knowing what the Colts had meant to my father, that I thought that would be a win. I thought that'd be a home run of an idea. So he said that. He's like, I can't have you guys mention anything, but we're bringing back the Colts fight song tune, and that's going to be the new Ravens fight song. And so that was kind of my first experience with Kevin Bryne. But for him to ask for some input from people that lived here, people that were born in Baltimore and had a sense of the history of the Colts. I that was something that always just resonated with me, that it was cool that he asked my opinion. I mean, at that point I was a 25-year-old, 26-year-old who didn't had no idea what I was doing, but I knew Baltimore sports, and I knew and understood the history of it, and I knew that that's something that would be a very popular decision. So that was my first experience with Kevin Bryne, and I think the overall takeaway from that little anecdote is how he and others within the organization, but him being a PR guy, really understood how important it was to bridge that gap between the Colts and the Ravens. And I think that's something that's continued today. When you see how often Lenny Moore is still at the Ravens facility, that's special. And that's something that I think meant so much to older generations. I mean, I can think back to my grandparents when it was first announced that the Browns were going to move to Baltimore. They didn't love the idea of Baltimore stealing someone else's team. They didn't. They said at the time.
I took those phone calls. I remember vividly.
But I think that the Ravens had such a sensitivity and an appreciation and a respect for Colts history, and they had Johnny U on the sideline for so many different games in the early years, and they brought the old Colts back. That it didn't take long, and it was something that at the time, my father was still alive at the time. He and I would joke so many times that, Grandmom and Grandpop say they're not Ravens fans, but they sure know everything about the team, and they sure are watching the game every week. But I think the Ravens just embracing that history, I think that was such a home run and so important for them to really get so many of those older fans who lived the Colts move and didn't like the circumstances of the Ravens coming to town. But I think them embracing the Colts and Kevin Bryne being someone that certainly had a hand in that, I think that just allowed so many more older people of the older generations to really embrace the Ravens here in Baltimore.
Luke Jones is here. He is Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST. We're sort of talking about sports right now, which we used to do around here all the time, which I'm sure at some point we'll get back to doing. All of it brought to you our dear friends, Raskin Global. Leonard Raskin's going to be here this week. We have been reaching out to all of our business friends. At some point, I'm going to grab Brett. Shipping so many pizzas over Pizza John's. My friend John Keller was delivered some pizzas over in Arkansas over the weekend, so he is enjoying delicious pepperoni pizza from Pizza John's. I saw that Luke made a trip before he wasn't allowed to leave Pennsylvania to Pizza John's. Your last foray into Maryland was at Pizza John's, of course. And Liberty Pure Solutions. My dear friend Doug Workman going to be joining us here. Plumbing, obviously, very essential. Well water, it's springtime, all that stuff going on. If you need fresh water and want to learn about water, we've been learning about water here with Doug Workman, our friends at Liberty Pure, as well as Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast. I had to gas up the other day. I was running low on gas when I was out taking care of my essential needs. I have been mainly here. I haven't even shaved, as you can see. At some point, I'm going to do that. Luke, I was going to go hockey beard, and I was going to go like long hair, and my kid has long blue hair and like this shirt, and I'm a couple weeks into this now, and I'm sort of pandemiced out, and I sort of want to go back to like something normal. Yeah. So I'm going to start bathing and shaving, and I might even like put a nice shirt on the set or something. I don't know. Like I need to do something that feels somewhat normal, and I think I might just sit down for the next 60 days and write a book about something, because like I've got to have a project, and I know people having time on their hands and sports on their hands. The one thing that you did this weekend that was completely normal for you and your brother was you planted your asses on the couch and had wings and drank beer and watched Wrestlemania, right? So I'm going to give you a little bit of oxygen, because this time last year I did a whole week on Wrestlemania, right? Yeah. And wrestling, and we ran all the old interviews and Vince McMahon and our Raw was War and all that. Wrestling's really happening. Like, they're allowed to touch each other. I'm trying. This comes to me as a little. I've been watching, I've been busy taking hydrochloroquine to make sure that I don't, catch the COVID. Because I've been watching these press conferences trying to figure out what's going on, but I didn't know that they were really wrestling until they were really wrestling on Sunday night. This really happened, right?
It did, and let's be very clear. It wasn't normal because they did WrestleMania over 2 nights. So it's the first time they've done that. Which
I honestly thought it was like a video game. I thought people are playing these video simulated baseball games and stuff, right? People are a little into that, and it's weirded out. I thought for a minute, are they doing simulated video wrestling? That's really what I thought. I didn't really realize wrestlers were going to touch each other because I thought that wouldn't be cool. But then again, they're friends. Maybe they took the hydrochloroquine, and maybe because they have a friendship with the orange guy, they got the special drugs first, I'm figuring.
Well, and I'll also remind you of this. They did tape WrestleMania, and it wasn't until very recently that Florida took measures, which their training center, their performance center is in Orlando. So I think there was some wiggle room in terms of that.
Oh, they taped these matches weeks ago.
I believe they taped WrestleMania. Now, WrestleMania aired, April 4th and 5th? I believe they taped a week to 10 days prior.
Wow, so it's like a soap opera now. They do it ahead of time.
Yeah, something like that. And now there's
I'm just learning, dude. I literally, I know nothing about this at all, than whatever chicanery and tomfoolery. Those are good Vince McMahon words. That Vince McMahon will be using will be because he has a special relationship and a red hat with the clown running the country. I mean, there's no question about that. So the fact that it sort of is going on and he's making money and printing money while everybody else is sort of shut down, somehow that doesn't shock me politically. So there is that part of it that when it happened, I'm like, well, yeah, all of Trump's buddies will be able to make money during that. I mean, he's not going to – and anyone that he doesn't have to shut down or he can have a special, president thing it makes all the sense in the world. So they wrestled weeks ago and put it in the can and then sort of made it for television on Sunday night or over the weekend, right?
Yeah, I mean, they taped it. I mean, it's to be very clear, it's an empty arena. Their performance center is where they do all of their developmental. I mean, years ago, WWF, WWE, they'd have Ohio Valley Wrestling.
Orlando, correct? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Kevin Eck worked down there, I think, for a long time. Right?
Sure. So they have, it's all streamlined now as far as their developmental. It happens at their performance center. Then, once wrestlers get a certain amount of training, they go into their NXT developmental, which I've mentioned the NXT and my fondness for that as far as part of the overall WWE brand. But yeah, they had WrestleMania. It was very unique. It's very strange. I think for all of the dialogue that all of us have had for weeks now. I mean, we were talking about this even before everything completely shut down in the world of sports. The dialogue about empty arena, empty stadium, it's different. And, I mean, it's something that I think once the novelty of it wears off, which, they've done empty arena shows for several weeks now. I don't know what's going to happen post-WrestleMania. There's been lots of rumors and speculation that they're going to at least take some sort of a break. We'll see how that plays out, whether that does play out. But watching the matches, and you know this as someone who, at least at some point in your life, professional wrestling was something you really liked, it's so dependent on fan reaction. It's so dependent on the suspension of disbelief, of having a crowd that buys into there being a good guy and a bad guy, and there being these ridiculous spots. And, there was a ladder match, for example, for a championship, and you had these guys do some ridiculous things off the ladder, and there's no crowd reaction to it, at least within the facility where they're filming this. There's reaction at home, and my brother and I certainly enjoyed parts of this, and I said to him when it ended on Sunday night, I'm not going to lie, I enjoyed WrestleMania way more than I thought I would, and that's even with some of the issues that you raised where I've been conflicted whether this should be happening right now or not, certainly. But it's been nice to have the distraction.
That's why I thought it was like a video game. I thought they could turn a video game because it's contrived to begin with. They could script really good video wrestling. I literally thought that might have been it. So what do I know?
Yeah. I mean, it's something. We've talked about it. I mean, NASCAR's had the iRacing, which has actually gotten some really good ratings. I mean, there's different things like that, but to this point, yeah, they've continued to do it. Now, it's certainly a stripped down staff. They have 2 commentators in the arena. They have the wrestlers in the ring. They have a referee. They have a couple camera guys, and that's basically it. There's literally no fans, and there isn't as much production staff on site, at least in the room where they're actually conducting the match. So, so they've taken some measures. They've talked a lot about how they're screening temperatures. They've made it clear, at least publicly speaking, and I haven't seen wrestlers pushing back on it. At least publicly. At least the wrestling dirt sheets. There hasn't been too much of this, but they've said it's been voluntary. They have had some wrestlers that backed out. Roman Reigns, who very well known, two-time leukemia survivor. He backed out of WrestleMania for obvious reasons a couple weeks ago. So they've it's been different, and they certainly had to adjust, and they made changes to the card, and they've had 1 or 2 wrestlers who have quarantined. Not a confirmed coronavirus necessarily, but guys that weren't feeling well, they sent home and they kept them away. And to this point, in that regard, I suppose you could say so far so good with how they've conducted business, right or wrong. But they were able to put together a pretty entertaining show. They did a couple matches that had more of a theatrical element. In fact, The Undertaker, who's still ticking in his mid-50s.
He's still taking under, is he?
He and AJ Styles had what they called a boneyard match. It was kind of more like a graveyard match, but you got to use the proper euphemisms right now, I suppose, as far as descriptors for things. But they actually filmed it almost like a B-action kind of horror movie. And you know what? It was very strange, but it was really enjoyable, and it was something that it was just different. It was something where they thought outside the box. They did that. They did another match like that on Sunday night with Bray Wyatt and John Cena, a Firefly Funhouse match that felt like you were watching. It felt like, Nestor, the best way I could describe the Firefly Funhouse match, I said this to my brother, it was like watching Yellow Submarine from the Beatles, only it was pro wrestling. They did like flashback stuff, and it was very strange. It was not your father's or your grandfather's professional wrestling of Bruno Sammartino, just wrestling a pretty standard cut and dry match.
Crazy you'd mention him, because my friend Debbie Rondo shared the magazine from the Zbyszko Sammartino cage match at the Civic Center. She was just, people are cleaning their places out, man. So everybody's cleaning their places out. They're putting some great stuff up. So love you, Debbie.
But yeah, so they did some different things, and look, some of the matches were flat without having a crowd, but that happens even with 75,000 fans in Raymond James Stadium, which is where Mania was supposed to be this year. So it was a very different, but I thought it was a fun card, and again, we'll see what happens now. There's been rumors and speculation as far as what's going to happen with them, but if you're looking for a model of what sports could look like, if it does come back at some point here in 2020, hopefully it does under safe conditions. But if you're trying to imagine what it's like without fans, WWE and even AEW, the upstart that's on TNT, they've been doing empty arena shows as well. It's different, and it's nice to have it, but at the same time, when you watch it and the fans aren't involved, and look, as much as we all can talk about fans and knowledge and fan opinions and things like that, fans are wildly important to this. If you don't have fans, at some point in time, it's a bunch of grown men playing a game, or it's a bunch of grown men doing some kind of choreographed dance with some physicality, if you're talking about pro wrestling. So the fans are of the utmost importance in that regard, but seeing something go on without fans, and we saw this on a very brief level with the empty ballpark game in 2015 here in Baltimore, it's very strange, and it is a reminder of how different things are right now. And like I said, if we are going to have sports here, hopefully sooner rather than later, is an empty, no crowd element to that, but kind of the first step. presumably, you would think, at least to some level, it's different. And, it's nice to have the diversion, but, again, it is a reminder of how different things are right now. And we all think of how much we take for granted going to a ball game, going to a football game, going to a wrestling show. I mean, things that are of the utmost joy in my life as far as leisure and professionally speaking.
Well,
with
yeah,
my livelihood. But
I've been showing this this wrestling thing here on the screen here. June 7th, 1980. Tonight is the match that the fans demanded to see. Bruno Sammartino, the living legend of wrestling, opposes Larry Zbyszko in what is certainly a grudge match. Bruno is completely outraged at Zbyszko's dirty and underhanded tricks. Tonight, he says that Larry must pay for his past deeds. You had to be there for it, right? I mean, no doubt about it. Ernie the Big Cat Lab was on that card that night, so I knew you'd appreciate that. So, wrestling still sort of go. Is there anything else like you've even paid attention to? I mean, baseball, 81 games. I mean, from a sports perspective, now that WrestleMania is over, like, you're exhaling. There's nothing, right? We have no more sports other than the draft, right?
Yeah, I mean, the NFL business being conducted, but even that, I mean, how about, the developments in recent days where, teams they're not even going to be in their war room. I mean, they're literally going to be drafting from their homes, and I still wonder what happens. I mean, this isn't that far-fetched. What happens if someone, some general manager in the league loses their internet connection? That happens, right? I mean, things happen. Your cable goes out. You lose your phone service for at least a few minutes. What happens when something like that occurs? So
I remember the Vikings fiasco. My God, right?
Right, exactly. I mean, we all remember that. Byron Leftwich could have been a Raven. You think about some of that, but yeah, beyond the business of the NFL being conducted, you do look at this thing and say, what is next on the calendar? And it's hard to say. And I don't want to be too gloom and doom, but over the last week to 10 days, I've become far more, not that I have any inside knowledge, I'm just following this just like everyone else, pessimism about whether they're even going to be able to play an 81 baseball game season. I mean, how would that even work? How is that structured? What would that mean for pitchers who get hurt all the time as it is, let alone having this incredible schedule disruption related to what they're doing, relative to what they're doing, understanding that there are far greater issues at work here. But it is a sense now of how are you getting your sports fix, so to speak. We've been seeing lots of old NFL games. I mean, NFL Network and Red Zone channel, they're going to be re-showing each Red Zone day for week 1, week 2, all the way through the end of the regular season. We're seeing more and more of the 30 for 30 documentary type stuff. ESPN's putting out their Michael Jordan 1998 Bulls miniseries a couple months early. Lots of people looking forward to that. I'm very much looking forward to that, having grown up watching that team, as a teenager and how big Michael Jordan was at that point in time. So, how are you getting your fix? I mean, you mentioned the e-gaming. NASCAR's had some success with that. That's a forum where, it's kind of conducive if you can present that like a real race. So, it's a fascinating case study for those of us who love sports the way we do, who understand the reality of the times we're living in, but we still miss sports. And we still need our escapes, whether it's watching a movie, whether it's watching WrestleMania in an empty arena type setting, whether it's watching an old game, whether it's playing video games. I mean, we all just can't sit there and watch the news all day. We understand that. We'll go crazy. So we all need those forums to be able to escape. And when it's a sports fan, it is different. You watch, flipping through ESPN over the weekend, you find old games, you find real niche kind of stuff, whether it's cornhole tournaments or different dart throwing, all kinds of weird stuff that you're seeing. But for right now, in terms of live sporting events, as you mentioned, with WrestleMania, even though it was taped, now it's kind of a case of what is going to be next. And when you see things over the summer already now being postponed or canceled, I mean, it definitely gives you, it's a slap in the face from a reality standpoint of knowing that, even if we figure out a way to play some baseball games this year, it's still it's not right around the corner. It's going to be some time, and I think that's that continues to be a sobering thought from a relatively speaking for a sports fan who, at every other junction of our life, whether you're talking 9/11, whether you're talking someone who grew up during World War II and baseball went on.
Even the day after the All-Star game, there was like a box score to look at.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I mean that's what, it's fun. I'm glad you mentioned that because that's what this feels like right now. The Wednesday and the Thursday after the All-Star break. Since the All-Star break's gone to 4 days, where Wednesday and Thursday there's nothing other than the ESPY Awards, which is something that I don't have any interest in watching. It feels like we're just stuck in a loop right now.
I'm not
right?
hardship that I need the ESPYs right now. I'm not feeling
I'll
like it's been gone so long that I need an award show tonight.
Yeah, I don't need an award show, but it's definitely different, and it really has been fascinating. And if I'm an owner, maybe not an owner, maybe someone that markets sports, I'm really paying a lot of attention to how sports fans are passing their time right now, whether it is video games. I mean, the Ravens have had Hollywood Brown and Ronnie Stanley on Twitch, which is basically an online forum where you can watch gamers, video gamers. I go and look at those. They had tens of thousands of views for that. Young people are into e-gaming, and as weird as it sounds to even me, I mean, we always joke, and I always say to you, get off my lawn, saying to you because you're a little bit older than I am, but something that I don't get at all is watching someone else play a video game. Playing a video game yourself, fine, but watching someone else. But Nestor, there's a niche, there's a market for that, and it's wild. And but if I'm a team, if I'm someone that markets sports, I'm looking at that as, at the very least, when things are back to normal, boy, that's a hell of a way to engage my fan base in the off season at the very least. So you look at that, you look at old games, you look at these different specials, you look at some of these. We've seen coaches and players live tweeting, engaging, or whether it's Reddit, something like that, watching an old game. Bill Self was watching Kansas's national championship game and live tweeting it. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways to still try to engage in the sports world in some way, but it's been fascinating to see how fractured it is because it's not the real thing. It's not the same as live sports, but I think us sports fans that are trying to have some sense of normalcy. I've said to you, one of the things that I've found myself doing is I'll put an old ball game on, just on in the background. I'm not really watching it. I'm writing. I'm doing some work. I'm doing taking care of bills, whatever. Just having a baseball game on in the background, just the ambience noise, the ambience of it, the background noise of it has been comforting to me, and it's weird. And some people would say that doesn't make any sense, but I think we're all just doing our own weird little things to try to get through this thing. Because as you mentioned, the niche of it, the novelty of this stay-at-home thing, it wears off pretty quickly, and you get to a point where you'd love to be able to just go to a ball game, even if it's the lousy 2018-19 Orioles, just to be able to do something normal like that, to go to a restaurant, whatever it might be, beyond takeout, to go and sit down somewhere and have a meal, such simple things that we take for granted that we can't do right now. So, as it relates to a sports fan, we're trying to figure out that way to get some kind of small fix, or at least a reminder of a fix, until this thing is back to normal one day.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke. Together, we're going to hold this thing together until such point when we actually play games again. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Don Moeller and I are going to be going through the arts this week, having all of the leaders on from the BMA and the Walters and the Aquarium and the Science Center and the Zoo and the theaters and the Everyman Theater and the Modell Lyric, and my pal John Schwartz is going to be here. So we're going to have a lot of guests this week. We're going to be talking to some political leaders and local leaders. We had the educational leaders on last week, as well as business leaders this week that I'm still grabbing and finding, and there's carryouts, and there's takeaways, and there's curbside, and there's all of that available. Please support our sponsors, support our friends, support our families. Let's keep it all together. We're keeping calm. We're staying local. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and keeping it Baltimore positive.